Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So, how does a chief people officer responsible for one of the largest care systems in the UK approach their role in an organisational development way? So this week, we're delighted to welcome the brilliant Sarah Morgan. Sarah is Chief People Officer for North Central London Integrated Care System. So North Central London Integrated Care System is a huge organisation. It consists of 12 hospital trusts, 5 busy London local authorities, 200 GP practices, 300 pharmacies. It serves a population of 1.6 million people and is also home to world-renowned medical institutions such as Great Ormond Street Hospital, Moorfields Eye Hospital, the Tavistock, and University College London. Sarah describes herself as an NHS manager at heart since 2002, and day to day she's wrestled some of the biggest issues around workforce and innovation. In her career, she's done things such as being the national lead for the Dalton Review, and the Dalton Review was a huge report that was done in 2014 that really looked at the way of working for the NHS. And we're going to look at how OD has played a key role for her career in terms of her new role now as Chief People Officer and also in her previous roles. And I actually met Sarah originally when she was Organisation Development Director at Guy's and St Thomas Hospital, and she shared her remarkable experiences during COVID, where everything and anything was absolutely changing about the way in which services were delivered and consumed. So we're absolutely delighted that Sarah's joining us, and she's going to be sharing highlights from her career, her working approach, and also how she builds really systemic partnerships across such a large and complex adaptive system. So welcome, Sarah, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome, Sarah. Lovely to have you. So to kick off, we'll just ask an easy, potentially not easy question. So what does a Chief People Officer for the North Central London Integrated Care System do? What does your role entail? What are your responsibilities?
So my role, I suppose there's two parts to my role. So the integrated care system is, as Gavin described, is a broad range of health and care providers, but it's led by an integrated care board, which is an organisation in its own right. They used to be called clinical commissioning groups, and that changed in July 2022, and we had 5 clinical commissioning groups come together. So the integrated care board, I'm the Chief People Officer for the staff that work for that organisation, as well as responsible for the workforce and people agenda across the 5 boroughs of North Central London, including all the providers and health and care, charities, voluntary sector organisations, etc., to try and support us to have a sustainable health and care system for our population.
Brilliant. That's a really huge role. And I guess the question we always ask every OD practitioner that we've is, what is your journey into OD? Like, how did you find it, or how did it find you?
Well, I'd say it was accidental, but actually, when I look back over my career, it was probably accidental by design. So I started out as a graduate in 2002, as you mentioned, in operational management in the NHS. And I found that I was always fascinated by the change aspects. Once I changed it, I didn't really have as much interest in maintaining the services. I always wanted to do different and do better, really. And I'd worked in acute settings, so hospitals, mental health, and also specialist services. So genetics was the service that I led across Cheshire and Merseyside for a while. And I think I'd sort of got to the point where I had a decision point whether I wanted to stay in the NHS or do something a bit different. And so I chose the different, and I went into consulting and worked for one of the big 4 for a number of years, leading big programs. And I always was interested in kind of the people change elements of it. But what used to frustrate me was the NHS would always cross off the OD bit. Oh, that's too much money. We don't want to do that. So we used to do it bit by stealth, and I realized that that's where my passion was. I did my master's on sense making and why the intention of policy is actually different to how it's implemented, and how social construct, particularly in very senior people, so I interviewed chief executives and medical consultants, really plays a part. And I've been fascinated by that concept ever since, really. And then when I came back to the NHS, I was a director with OD in my portfolio, but at that point, it's probably what everyone would recognise as HR business partners in the learning and development function rebadged. So trying to really think about what does OD mean in the context of the NHS. And then you mentioned the Dalton Review, which was a national policy that looked at how you could create group models in the NHS. And that has really taken off as a policy. Actually, there are a lot of group models, and that does require organisational design and development. And that took me to Guy's and St Thomas's, where I was the Director of Organisational Development for about 7 years, leading on the design part as well as the OD overall for Guy's and St Thomas's, which when I started had 12,000 people, and when I left it had 25,000 people working for it. So a really exciting place to be, and really accepting of OD. So actually the senior leadership really embraced all sorts of OD interventions, which is actually quite a delight and quite unusual, I would say, in some places. So kind of a golden thread, but a little bit accidental as well.
That's an absolutely fascinating, and we're loving the whole sense making, because almost like the NHS is the ultimate complex adaptive system, isn't it? So sense making and understanding how different people are making sense of what's going on is really important. Obviously, we talked about the fact that I saw you when you were actually giving that talk at the CIPD conference about your time during COVID there. Can you just shed a little bit of light on that? What was it like to do OD at a time like that, when everything and anything was absolutely upside down, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I always describe it as an absolute privilege, because it was such a challenging time in the NHS in particular, and staff were going through such a difficult time, that being able to be there to work alongside. So we partnered with our psychology team to really support staff. So one of the examples I think I shared when I was talking was, after the first wave of COVID, we actually ran reflection sessions for over all of the critical care staff that had been involved, and we ran that over a month, because there was about 400 staff that had been involved, because Guy's and St Thomas is a very big organisation. As you know, they'd also cared for the Prime Minister during that period, and that in itself was quite a challenging time for people. So to be able to bring to bear the opportunity to be able to hold space to help people connect to their experience in a safe way, obviously with our psychology team making sure that we didn't do anything we shouldn't be doing, but also put on for leaders and managers a lot of support, leadership support circles, as they were called, bringing peers together to learn and share. We had bite-sized coaching, so when people had issues, they had really quick access to things, all the way through to running a supermarket, which we had to stand up in 6 days, which was quite epic, and took me all the way back to my operational management days, where at least I know I can still work well in a crisis. So there's all the lovely OD bits, but then there's how do you operationally manage in a crisis. So to be able to do all of that work that we did with we were heavily supported by the charity for Guy's and St Thomas's, which was really an important part of it. But it was such an experience, and I have written a blog about it, because I really wanted to share that experience, and we really put humanity and sort of heart and love at the heart of everything that we did, because we really wanted to show the staff that they were valued and that we cared about them at a time when often that it didn't really feel like that, with all the issues that are now obviously being reported more broadly in the media.
And humanity seems to be like a thread that's kind of gone through your career, isn't it? Like putting it at the heart of OD. You've kind of, all those skills have now come together in your new role as Chief People Officer for this ICS. How did you know where to begin? How did you work out who to talk to, how to navigate the terrain, how to understand the priorities, and where to really focus your effort? Because it's a huge role, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it was made relatively easy for me in this role, because they'd all come together quite well during COVID. So I kind of inherited, essentially, particularly from the NHS side, quite a well-established set of relationships. The bit that I've really had to work hard on and navigate, and have found tricky in some ways, because it's just not straightforward, is finding who the right people are in local authority partners and other partners, because obviously naturally the NHS, you can sort of work through who the natural people are, but to work with a different different part of the local authority that isn't around the social care side. So it's about economic regeneration and our inclusive economy colleagues who work with the labour markets in their local boroughs. They have employment hubs. It's quite a different environment, and it was a group of colleagues that I'd never worked with, and if I'm honest, I didn't really know was existed, which is fascinating when you start realizing what you don't know. So what a lot of my job has been finding out what I don't know, asking quite a lot of questions, and then that slowly but surely leading us to kind of new partners, new opportunities, and it's been really fascinating. I've learned so much in the last 18 months. It's been fascinating.
That sounds it. So what does a typical week look like? I was going to ask typical day, but I think probably typical week might be an easier
I know. I started
lens to look
writing
through.
this. I started writing this down, and I thought, wow, I don't know how my brain keeps up with this. So it really ranges. So every Monday morning, I always meet with my senior team, and then I meet the executives, have a huddle as well. So there's sort of a rhythm to the week where certain points of the week we meet, and we always have executive team meeting on a Thursday morning as well, which is our formal meeting. But in and around that, it could be anything ranging from challenges to do with the organisational change programme. We're currently having to reduce the organisation by 30%, and we've run a whole organisational change programme. We're just coming out the other side of that. ER cases through to meeting health charities and thinking about how we might work together differently, through to I've just launched a chair appointment, so we're recruiting for a new chair. So that's been quite an interesting, new to me kind of approach, because it's actually an NHS England format. So that's been a massive learning curve in the last 2 weeks, but through to kind of workforce, setting our workforce priorities for the system, working through kind of our business plan and business planning this week for my team and HR and OD, what we're going to do for the year. The staff survey results are out, so what does that mean? And then I meet the chief people officers every week. We meet the chief execs together across the system every week. So it's a real eclectic mix. And actually, I'm also out for a director at the moment, so I've been having lots and lots of candidate calls this week, so it's in and around, so interspersed, and I am an honorary associate professor at the University of Birmingham, and I had a conversation about some exciting opportunities there. So it is, it's, my brain has to flip from one thing to another quite a lot.
So diverse, so really interesting. The other thing in terms of diversity, with you've already described a bit about the system you're working in and the partners and stuff. So that's a really diverse population you're working with very different needs and perspectives. How do you go about integrating those different perspectives to make stuff happen, create alignment?
So a lot of it is conversational based, and building on relationships. I think pretty much these roles, there isn't really a hierarchy to it. So though I'm the chief people officer for the sector, the chief people officers within the organisations don't report to me. There is no line there. So it is about a peer relationship where we've all got our roles in the system, and it's how we come together. So really my only power is what is vested in me by colleagues, which is a really interesting kind of challenge in and of itself. So how do you lead when you're not in charge is a really interesting leadership challenge. And so a lot of it is co-creation, thinking about kind of what is it that will benefit the most. So where are the highest impact things that we can do? So at the moment we're just scoping some of those out for next year, thinking about kind of where do we want to put our energy. One of the key ones that we want to look at is how do we attract more young people into careers in health and social care? There is not the pipeline, I suppose, for want of a better phrase, that we've previously enjoyed, because people are seeing sort of in the press, etc., that if you're a nurse, potentially you're going to a food bank. That's not been a very good PR campaign for us, to be honest. And actually there's 350 careers, and particularly for us, healthcare science is something that we really want to promote. We want to be talking to young people who want careers in science and technology about what the opportunities could be. So there are over 50 careers in health science alone, so things like nuclear medicine, all sorts of opportunities that people just don't realize are there, but can afford a fantastic career. So we want to start really getting into schools and promoting ourselves in that way. So there's all sorts of ways we coalesce around particular things, and it's fascinating to always be in a different stakeholder group talking about different things, so that's what keeps me interested. And I think really seeing the fact that you can have a direct benefit on people's lives through good work being what we describe as population health intervention. So if you've got a better life chances, your health will be better. If you've got opportunity for good work to build careers, that does really improve your overall health completely. And it is such an important part of what our role is and what we do.
Brilliant. And I guess one of the questions that we're really curious to understand is, obviously there's the CPO role. Obviously the way you've defined it, it's unique and for that organisation. How has being an OD practitioner shaped the way in which you've approached the role?
Yeah, that's really interesting. So there's two aspects to it. So in the organisation itself, so as I mentioned, we've had to restructure our organisation. We've had to reduce by 30%, putting sort of humanity back to that humanity point at the heart, and having an OD lens on what is essentially a HR process has been incredibly important, because we listened to what staff said. I mean, this isn't the first organisational change that this staff have been through. So we listened to what went well and didn't go so well in the last process, and we tried to build in learning and lots of opportunity for staff to engage prior to the consultation, which is quite difficult because you can only go so far before you trigger a consultation. I think the fact that I'm not actually a HR through and through person means that I do naturally bring that OD lens to it. So we've managed to go through the change program. We're about to stand up our new organisation, and I think this is where the OD really comes in. How do you stand up a brand new organisation? Well, it's not brand new in terms of the people, etc., but it's new in terms of the structure, the purpose. What we're there to do is quite different to what clinical commissioning groups were there to do. So we've built a program that is high performing teams at the heart of the organisation. It's building blocks of everything that we do, and then we're wrapping around the senior leaders a leadership development program to make sure that they feel equipped to lead in this new way. And that brings in sort of the elements of self, the elements of leading a team and an organization, and leading in the system. So back to your, how do you lead in a complex adaptive system? How do you lead when you're not in charge? These are really important things for our leaders to grapple with, and are quite different to the much more, I suppose, contractual relationship that was there previously between the providers and the commissioners when we had the traditional commissioning model. So from an organisation perspective, we are now really starting to go with really go in our OD approach. We also have made sure that we've done inclusive recruitment practices all the way through, because we could see from our EQIA, our Equality Impact Assessment of the Change Programme, that people that were young, were more junior, or Black, Asian, minority ethnic colleagues could be disadvantaged in the process, and we had to make sure that we addressed that, and we've been very open with our staff. So we've tried to be as open and transparent at every stage that we could be. And then in the system, that's about how do you hold space? How do you convene? How do you bring people together to coalesce around particular challenges and to actually drive things forward? How do you work through as well as with others? And that in itself, I think, in many ways, it's having an OD mindset, isn't it? You end up stylistically, and your leadership style ends up having that OD approach to it. But all of that OD background, I think, has set me up well to be able to hold those spaces for multiple partners with multiple perspectives to come together and think about the big challenges that face us in our system.
I have so many questions. Somebody just said that. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I ask both these. So one of the things you said there was about leadership, and you have a really good blog, and if you're happy for us to share the link, we'll put it in the show notes with us as well.
Yeah, definitely.
And one of the things you talk about is when you first sort of entered, the workforce, the emphasis was very much on heroic leadership. They're kind of like the superhero, iconic big personality. And your thinking has evolved as well as sort of the education around it. Where do you sort of stand on what makes an effective leader, particularly in an environment where you are now?
Well, I think you have different skill sets at different times. So I think in the environment of the system, it is about this relationship building, it's collaborative leadership, I would describe it of, not necessarily. I was trying to think, is it participative, but in many ways I think it's this collaborative leadership approach. But ultimately, we are still having to hold to account when things need to be held to account. So you have to be able to shift your leadership style for the context. And I think context is king in all of this. The heroic leadership, even during COVID, I don't think had a place, because actually the difference with COVID was nobody knew what they were doing. So nobody could be the hero. And actually, when we went we did a survey of kind of what people had found during COVID, like what were their learnings. And actually many of the, especially staff in training, said what was great was that they could all contribute because nobody was the expert, and they all felt empowered to have an idea. And I think that really was very interesting. So you could think, well, we suddenly went into command and control. Is that heroic leadership? But even then, it was heroic but humble. It was heroic because we had to be doing things we were facing head on, but it was humble in terms of people didn't know the answers, and it was a collective endeavor in a way that it hadn't been. But ultimately you still have goal command who has to make a difficult decision at some point. So that's kind of where that leadership style comes in. So I think it's all about the context and how you move. And in the context of an integrated care system, it is really about the relationships.
Yeah. And it sounds like it was quite freeing for people not to have to know the answer, and for the leaders not to have to pretend they knew the answers, and for others to be able to.
It's hard to break the habit, actually.
Yeah.
It's really hard to break the habit. And a lot of people grow up being technical experts.
Yeah.
And they have quite narrow careers. And I suppose my mission in life is to help people think about breadth. I think breadth is a very good thing. I think if you can see you have experience and you've seen things from different sides, you have a much more rounded perspective. So, my career has spanned operational management, consultancy, working in the civil service, leading, being director in an organization. It's lots of different perspectives. And now I'm starting to get the perspective of new partners, local authorities. What does it mean to be in the voluntary sector? And these are new perspectives to me. And I think you're always learning, and it's really fascinating to sort of see the same problem from multiple angles, and to really have be able to accept other people's point of view often. And there is a sometimes we can get quite binary, and I think actually being able to have this broader open-minded perspective is a really important part of co-creation. So that's the bit that we really want to make sure that we build the capability and the confidence, because you have to be quite confident to say, well, I don't know, let's use the hive mind to do that. And often people shy away from it because they feel that then they're undermining themselves in some way.
Yeah, I think you mentioned when you bring these people together, they have their different interpretations, their own assumptions, their own biases, different information gaps, and different levels of influence. And it is that melting pot you're bringing people together in, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that is a joy. It is so interesting. Like, I always learn something. I learn things from my team every day. I learn things from talking to other people every day. That for me is really, that's what keeps these jobs enjoyable, because I get very bored very quickly, hence all the change. But this job is never boring, and it's also a really the sector, the chief execs and in the sector, and the chief people officers are such a great group of humans, to be honest, that it is actually a really good place to come together and to work together in.
Perfect. So you've talked a lot about partnerships and the importance of those and how you've had to forge new partnerships as you're in the role. Have you got any hints or tips for how people can build those partnerships at speed? So you obviously want to get things done quickly and build up those relationships. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so I think is it Stephen R. Covey says change is built at the speed of trust, and I think that's so true. I mean, we did lots of sessions on that when I was at Guys and Tommy's. We used to do that with our leaders. So I think it is about having open and honest conversations, lots of coffees, lots of chats, lots of building. If you can coalesce around something. So we've recently put in a big bid for a Department of Work and Pensions programme that came out of the spring budget called Work Well, which is about supporting people with long-term conditions, mental health problems back into work. And we've been able to coalesce around a common purpose with colleagues, and everyone's got really excited and passionate about the opportunity. The other programme that we had that we've really brought partners together on is care leavers, so care experienced young people, supporting them into roles in the NHS specifically. It's an NHS programme. And we were one of 10 pilots in the country to do that. But I could see that it was such an opportunity to come together with local authorities and the charity sector in a way that was different, that we could build new relationships, because this was really about the corporate parent role of local authorities, and also back to the inclusive economy, urban regeneration part of the councils and their role in employment for local people. So it gave us a completely new set of relationships, and I think that's the important bit. It's finding things that you can have common purpose with, where you can use that as your springboard, and also lots of coffee.
Yeah. I think the big thing is, though, you do it at speed. That's the big thing,
Yeah, have
because
to do it
sometimes these
quickly.
can be very long, drawn out processes, building trust. And I think you sort of talk about building a North Star, but how do you do it at speed? I think there was one thing you were talking about where you sort of built a partnership with Dartford and Gravesend, and two very different institutions with different catchment areas, different staff, different challenges, and you managed to bring them together at speed. Like, what is it? Is it a secret sauce? Is it a dark art, or is it is there a way to do it that others can
It's
learn from?
I think it's tenacity as well. So it's completely, so that was really bringing the exec teams together quickly. I mean, I think I was meant to be on holiday the day we came in. I was in between like a holiday and going to Glastonbury. It was that kind of, it's why it sticks in the mind. And I came in to facilitate this session between the two exec teams, and we could see there was something there. But then you need to build that momentum. And and again, that had a goal, because it was the 5-year forward view at the time, and there was funding to be a vanguard from NHS England, so we could build things quickly because we had like momentum to get a bid, get relationship, get some things going. And I think that does help, because if you're just kind of meeting and having a chat, these things can be a slow burn. So I do think that common purpose really helps you build at speed, something that we want to achieve together. Is really, I think that's the secret sauce, is kind of that shared purpose.
And don't skip that step. That's the foundation it's built on.
Yeah, I personally think so. When we did that session, we came together to say, across sort of strategic, financial, culture, like where were our opportunities, and where did we come together? And we thought, well, there's enough here to at least carry on. Let's just build on it and let's keep going. And it turned into a 4-year relationship that really it lasted halfway through COVID even, which was quite amazing given everything everyone was doing. And really, we set up the first epilepsy service in Kent for pediatrics, so for children. Before that, it was children having to go to A&E. And so with that, there's some really proud moments of what you can achieve when you come together and coalesce around a purpose. And the purpose there was to bring the best of a teaching hospital to the local population of Dartford and Gravesham.
Fabulous. So you mentioned there one of the successes was that epilepsy initiative. What are the other successes? What are the biggest impacts when you look back at your kind of career? What are the big impacts that you see you've done?
Well, I think my biggest impact was leading the Dalton Review, which has been one of the biggest it was at the time, it was one of the biggest engagements that had been done for policy making, because we not only engaged with the sector and NHS professionals, etc., but we actually engaged with the public as well around what it could mean to create group models. And these are organisations that come together, so you have a bigger catchment area in the same organisation to create standards, reduce unwarranted variation, and you have certain, a big leadership team at the top rather than lots of leadership teams. So it's been adopted quite far and wide across the NHS, and I think has seen some real successes there for populations, for reducing clinical variation. So it's hard to point to and say those absolute things happened, but the fact that it's been widely adopted, I think, is a really important point. The Vanguard programme that we ran between Guy's and St Thomas's and Dartford had some pathway changes in vascular and cardiovascular and paediatrics, and we did some really great work between the two organisations. The reason that worked was because Guy's and St Thomas's was a tertiary centre for Dartford, so the patient flows were already there, even though it was in Kent, so in a different region. So that was really exciting. And I think it's kind of the little moments as well. So some of the leadership development programme we did at Guy's and St Thomas's that was actually team based. So we brought together the clinical director with their heads of nursing and their general manager, and we actually put in a team-based program that was all about embodied leadership, so completely differently. And all the directorates went through it, and they just finished, and then COVID hit. And I like to think that they all bonded during this program that enabled them to lead well during that crisis, because we were really trying to move away, as we talked about earlier, the heroic leadership model. We were trying to move towards, this is a team. When you're in a clinical setting, the team is vitally important, and that's what we wanted to role model in the organisation. And my best moment was seeing some of our clinical directors meditating as part of this session, which was an absolute delight.
Yeah, it must be a sight to behold. Yeah,
absolute sight to behold, definitely.
Cool. What do you find most challenging about the role that you're doing now?
It's been challenging to join an organisation, then immediately be given a mandate to reduce it by 30%. So that was quite challenging. I mean, we knew we needed to reorganise anyway. It was when you've brought, which ultimately it was 6 organisations coming into one, you have to redesign that so it makes sense. But I'm not sure we would have chosen to reduce by the amount that we've had to. However, we have done that as a real zero base of the organisation, as I say, put humanity at the heart of it, and we've tried our best to make what is an incredibly difficult situation slightly better for colleagues as much as we possibly could. We didn't get everything 100% right, but the fact that we've managed to stick to our timetable and will be ready to stand up on the 1st of April, I think is really important. But that has been challenging at times. And just managing everything, it's I sent my chief executive a gif of me juggling balls this week to say this is sort of currently how I feel. There's just so much going on at the moment. We're in what's called operational planning for the NHS, so we're doing all the plans for next year for the NHS. That's a huge piece of work. We're trying to stand up the organisation. I've just got so many different things. I'm trying to recruit my new team so that we can get going on other things, and yeah, there's just always something, but in a way that keeps it exciting, it keeps it fresh, and it keeps your momentum going.
Yeah, I guess obviously you mentioned that relationship between you and the chief executive is probably one of the most critical relationships in the organisation, isn't it? How do you stay aligned and ensuring that, because obviously it's that you have the same priorities, and obviously you're accountable to them. How do they sort of assess that you're on track? Obviously there's the traditional measures, but how do you stay aligned in this fast moving relationship?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and I've got a change of chief executive as well. So my chief executive is currently on a career break for a few months, and but she and I work really, really closely together. I think that's the only way that you can do these jobs. You are, as a chief people officer, it's a challenging role to be on an executive. And I always said that being a director of OD was a challenging role, because you're the person that is sort of responsible for the what people see. You're not responsible for the culture, but people look to you and say, culture's your job, and obviously it's everybody's job, and in particular the chief exec's job. But you're sort of, when you're in these roles, you're a colleague in the executive, but you're the confidant of the chief executive. So sometimes there is, they can be a tightrope to walk as the chief people officer, as many listeners on this call will be ultimately familiar with. But staying aligned, and I've got a close relationship with my current chief executive, because he is our substantive chief finance officer. And I've been really fortunate, because the belief of the chief executive and the chief finance officer are that HR and OD and finance are the pillars of an organization. So it doesn't really matter what organization you're in, those are the pillars that make it work. If you can't have a misaligned finance and HR and OD function, because the organization will suffer. So we've had that as a triumvirate, we've had that belief. And so I think that's been really important. How do they hold me to account and know that I'm doing it? I think they just tell me when I wasn't. So so we obviously, all the, like you say, all the traditional one-to-one and appraisal and all of those things. But I think I felt very supported, and also HR has been invested in, because it's been really chronically underinvested in previously. And I think that support means that I do go the extra mile to make sure that it's delivered. So touch wood, I feel that there's nothing, they've not had anything to worry about if they're listening. It's all on track, and it's just a regular, it's regular updates and them feeling confident in what we're doing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think one of your quotes that you quoted someone, and it was OD is the alchemy of good performance, and so therefore, how do you measure alchemy?
Yeah, exactly. What's the
Because
secret
it just works,
sauce?
doesn't it, when things are working well? We were interviewing Dr. Aidan Harney from Intel last week, and he sort of described himself as the conductor. And so it's like ensuring that things all fit together, but it's very difficult to measure the role of the conductor almost, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And when it's not working. And I think the bit that was really important, though, was coming into the organization not thinking, oh, I know all this. And it's back to this social construct, and kind of my caution really that came out of my master's, that I think I've held on to now for nearly 20 years, which is, because your brain does shortcuts, our lizard brain does a shortcut. It says, oh, I've seen this before, and therefore I know how to sort all of this. It's fine. Nothing, I'm on it. I didn't want to come in and think, well, I know exactly how all this needs to happen, because I've been the director of OD in a massive organization. Because of course not, because this is a completely different culture with its own foibles. The staff have been through a different experience. The context is absolutely king. So part of it was really getting to understand where the organization really is, and meet it where it is, and understand kind of what's important to people, and what's gone well, what's not gone well, and how do you build on that. Because otherwise, if you come in just thinking you know all the answers, I just think that's destined to fail. And I think too many people, it's a bit back to that we've got to know the answer. Also, a lot of people have too many toolkits where they think, well, if I just do this because it worked in my previous organization, and then they can't understand when it doesn't work. And you think, well, you've got to really take a moment. You haven't got many of these moments, but you have to take a bit of a breath and a moment to understand the context you're in, and what's going to work in that context.
So I was going to say, I think that's part of the OD lens, isn't it? That you believe, some of the answers are in the system already, and the people, you bring the people into the process of coming up with the solutions.
And it's been hard to do that lots before, because of it being an org change program. But the future is now. We're now on this future trajectory where our real ambition is to really empower people, autonomy, mastery, purpose. I mean, that Daniel Pink's work, I've been really taken with that for many years. And I do think there's a lot in that. How do you get intrinsic motivation? How do you support people to progress and feel that they're making a difference. So that's really important to us as we move forward.
Yeah, I guess the challenge is, though, that on the other side of the equation is their expectations of a senior hire. So how long a grace period do you actually get before you're seen to sort of be
10
delivering
minutes.
value?
You get your first cup of tea, and then no, exactly that. And this was really the biggest job I've ever gone for, and the process was in and of itself terrifying, because it's a really big job. But I really believed in kind of what I knew could happen, and the three promises that I made in my interview, which is I wanted North Central London to be a great place to live and work. I wanted the ICB to be a great place to work, and I wanted it to be the best place to be a people professional. Those are still the things that I want to do, and they're still the things that are in our plans and driving us forward. And I think that's really important. I'd really thought about what is the commitment and what can I bring to this role for to support the greater success of the system. And so far so good, I think, touch wood.
Brilliant. A question that we always ask, and it should be really interesting for yourself to answer. Along the way, what are some of the biggest lessons that you've learned?
So I think my real lesson in just general has been moving at the speed of the system. I'm literally always in front. I'm going, come on, everybody. And I think actually you've got to meet people, you've got to meet the system where it is and work with it. And I find that sometimes I forget. I still forget. It's still always learning the same lesson. I think Brené Brown says, what lesson is the universe continually teaching you? That she asked in all her podcasts, and this is my lesson. I'm always really restlessly ambitious for wherever I am and whatever we're doing. But I think you've really got to make sure you take people with you, and that's crucial, because then otherwise, you are just being the leader out the front, aren't you? So how do you engender that passion and the helping people to want to work towards that North Star or that common purpose? So that's definitely one. So when I thought about this, I thought patience, but actually it's broader than patience. It's kind of tempering myself and keeping people where I am. What other lessons? So I've got a new lesson that I want to learn, or new skills that I want to learn, which is more about being in the political space. That's something for me that is my next kind of real area that I want to focus on, because it's an incredibly important relationship that we have with our political leaders, and it's something that I haven't yet really managed to sort of have in my career. So that is something, well, apart from the Department of Health when I was working with the Secretary of State, but so that just sound like I've done a bit of it, but only for a short period, only a year. And this is something that I really want to sort of understand more. And I think there's a lot to learn from local authority colleagues and elected members in that space. So I think it's always be curious, always be learning. These are the things that I would say are my lessons. You've always got to be refreshing yourself and realizing what you need to learn next.
Which is quite a nice segue into our next question about your own learning and development. So you talked about doing a master's. How do you invest in your own learning and development now? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, so my most recent program that I've been on is an anti-racism program, how to lead anti-racist organizations. And that was born out of me feeling like I didn't know what to do in a situation at work. And I thought, blimey, I'm the chief people officer, I'm meant to know what to do, a bit like that heroic leadership. But it was more I've noticed that I've got a gap here in my own sort of skill set. And so there was a program that's run by a charity called BRAP that was for London. So it was run in London for people leaders in London. And I walked in thinking, right, okay, brilliant. I'm going to get all the things that I've said don't do. I'm going to get a toolkit, right? So I'm not, I'm not adverse to thinking all the things everybody else thinks all the time. And then what I came to realize after about the 4th month of these sessions was it was all about yourself and your own self-awareness and what you know, and really doing some deep work. And I think the bit that's been fascinating is now I've been having conversations that I would never have had before. I'm reading things that I would never have really picked up previously. And it's really taught me so much. And now the problem is you can't unsee any of these things. And so that is that is really challenging, the fact that you once you start seeing it, you really can't unsee it, and then you really have to do something about it. But acknowledging the situation that we're all in and the history that we're all part of. But yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating, and it built some really strong relationships with people in the people profession across London to go through something like that together.
Brilliant. You've painted organisation development as a really sort of exciting and invigorating profession. What advice would you give, like, the next generation of OD practitioners that are coming through, as advice for them in terms of how they might start their career or take their first steps?
Yeah, it's challenging because OD has so many routes into it. There isn't really a defined career, and it's such a hot topic at the moment. So I'm chairing for the NHS England. I'm chairing our national task and finish group on people profession career map and how we can help people navigate a career. And and actually, what we notice is there's almost, we were calling it a Venn diagram. You come up through HR, or you come up maybe through learning and development, you might come up through project management or operational management. And then you kind of, if people convene into a point where they all realize they really like change, they really like, transforming things. And then suddenly there's an OD career that sort of emerges for people. But it's hard to navigate, and the career path. So being a director of organizational development is a brilliant job. I absolutely adored it, but there aren't many of them. There aren't many of these jobs. So I would say, for me, it was just following my passion. And, it led me to kind of go for jobs that I probably wouldn't have gone for. So a director of development job was the one. And actually I went for it because it had business planning in it, believe it or not. The bit that I found I absolutely loved but hadn't really thought about previously was the OD bit. And so I learned on the job. So I think it's about spotting opportunities and spotting those things. And maybe, so if you are in the NHS, there is a network called Do OD through, and there is a lot of resources on there for people to find out how to do what they call the Essentials OD program. So it's free for anyone who's in the NHS, and you can start to learn the basics, and then you can start to use them in your day to day. So if your L&D department runs action learning sets, or you want to train to be a coach, and I think there's little ways that you can nudge your way into a career like this, because it is quite a challenge. I think it's not quite straightforward. Go for it. What was my key message. Definitely go for it, because it is brilliant work.
Fantastic, Sarah. And I think that's a really nice place just to finish our conversation today. Danny and I have been looking forward to this conversation all week, and like, I personally have really enjoyed it.
It's definitely lived up to expectations. So thank you,
Good.
Sarah.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it too.
Some of the things I'm going to take away. So put your assumptions aside, be curious, always be learning, take time to understand the system before you start to change it, meet the system where it is. You talked about joy, which I think is something we don't talk about enough. There should be more joy in our work. And you talked about the joy of actually developing partnerships, developing collaboration, and building something like that as well. And you also talked about the shift from heroic leadership to a more sophisticated, collaborative, more participative form of leadership. And so there's just so many things that we're taking away from today. And I guess one of the quotes might be quite good to leave you with, that we found you sort of saying, was, diversity brings creativity, alignment ensures delivery, which I thought was a really nice way of sort of talking about how leadership can be.
Thank you. Yes.
Brilliant. If anyone has any questions, are the people okay to reach out to you via LinkedIn?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I'm on there. Just Sarah Morgan. Just so hopefully you'll find me there.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. So we really appreciate it. We know you're very busy. So thank you for making time. And I know that people are going to get a lot of value from it as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Sarah.